Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I am joined by Xian and we are going to be running you through a footwork masterclass. For a brief, I guess, contents page of what you can expect from this video, what is it that we're going to cover and in roughly what order?
So first we'll talk about 1, why footwork is important, 2, what we're trying to achieve with our footwork, and then we'll look at the 3 big factors that influence footwork.
Let's get into it. From a coach's perspective, why is it that footwork and getting your technique for footwork dialed is so important?
Okay, so footwork is your foundation on which you use all the other techniques. So when we're climbing, there are really only maximum of 4 points, okay, 5 if you add a knee bar, but 4 points that will be in contact with the wall. So that's your 2 hands and your 2 feet. And most of the time you're reaching with 1 hand, so it's 2 feet and 1 hand.
Sure.
So if these contact points are not stable and secure, then you can't do any technique. Okay, first up we need to think about what we want to get out of our footwork. Okay. There are 2 results you want to achieve every time you place your foot. 1, it needs to be stable, and 2, it needs to allow movement.
Yes.
And it's very important to consider that both are important, because if we can place our foot in a way that's best for stability, but we can become stuck because it traps our hips. So placing your foot in a way that allows movement allows you to use your hip, which is one of the strongest joints in your body.
With you, you see newer climbers like doing the classic, like placing the whole foot on a hold because it feels perhaps a little bit more secure. You've got more surface area on the hold. Yeah. You don't have to be as precise, but like you said, perhaps by doing that, you're then making upwards progress a lot harder for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Movement. Yes. So I think it's useful to highlight that it's actually a really logical thinking that led to the whole foot being plonked on the foothold, and I think it's so important to acknowledge that, because when we first start climbing, stability is the most important thing we're looking for. You've never stood on anything so small before. As we progress through climbing and we get better at stabilizing ourselves, then we start to trade that support for movement. And that can carry on for many years.
So before we get into the bulk of the climbing, we are first going to look at the tools which we use to execute good footwork, our climbing shoe. So we thought it would be useful to go into a little bit of detail on, I guess, the anatomy of the climbing shoe and how we can best make use of it to improve our footwork.
Yeah, okay, cool. So this is the bit you stand on, that's a toe box. The inside edge is this bit here. The outside edge is this bit over here. The edges are generally the stiffest part of the shoe. I like to call this the pivot point up here because that's where you can pivot. The other thing I like to call, maybe it's not fully used, is the smear radius.
Okay.
So usually I think of that as the smear radius, and that's because that's where you smear up to, which is from the pivot point up to the balls of your foot. That is the heel, so we use that for heel hooking. And that is, I don't know what that's called, the toe patch, I suppose,
Yeah.
for toe hooking.
Yeah.
So the pivot point over here is less stable, but allows movement. It's less stable because your foot will have to stabilize more because it's a bit softer, but yeah, it allows you to pivot. The 2 edges are the most stable, but they don't allow movement. The rule of thumb is, if you need more support, stand on your edges. If you need more movement, stand on your toe. So now we're going to look at footholds and how to read them. So it's the best way to think about a foothold is on a spectrum, because every foothold is special. So on one hand, you have the Incut things, you know, just like things you hold with your hands, the Incut holds. So that's an Incut foothold, that's a one end. Then in the middle, you have the flat holds, which are like this, even, because they stick out and they're basically horizontal. And on the other hand, you have the smears, which are the opposite to the Incut, because they're on the down. So what we'll do now, we'll just do the textbook ways to step on each of them, and then we'll do practical later. Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's start with the Incut. Okay, so what you can do with the Incut is that you can dig into it and you can tiptoe. On a flatter hold, there's less scope for really like getting onto your tiptoes, but you can still do a good job. So the goal with this one is almost to extend out the profile of the foothold, so extending out that horizontalness, and then you push from there. So say on this foothold, not stable, not stable, not stable, not stable, 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 not stable, not stable, not stable. On a smear, what we're aiming for is to get this part of the foot onto the foothold, and we want it to follow the slope. So sort of like this. And then, ideally, what happens is then you push the heel up a bit, like that, because it puts some weight onto the foothold, right? And then now, that's fine. So that's stable. Okay, so now we're just going to see in action as well what happens when we pivot and how the edges and the pivot point differ. Okay, so if I was to place it on my inner edge, like here, super stable. But if I did any sort of movement at all in my hip, boom, 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 da, da. Okay, the same goes for the outside edge. If we knew we had to pivot on this foothold, then we'd want to place it like this. So then you can go, what should I do? Should I do this? Should I do this? Should I do this? Oh, I know, it's this. Okay, so now we're going to look at the footholds, and we're going to talk about identifying the best part of the foothold to step on. There are a lot of things we can talk about, but this is the easiest way to decide where to step on, which is just to touch the foothold and think about where you would hold it with your hands if it was a handhold. So if I just touch everything and I think about putting my weight on it, it's here. So most positive and biggest, and that's exactly where we want to stand. So the other thing we can see in this foothold here is that it's got a down slope this way. So it's like a hill. You know, you're walking up the hill, and this is the flat bit. So that's going to mean that that's going to be the easiest place to step on. Because if we were going to stand on the slope, you have to work quite hard to keep putting even tension against the slope, like in the direction of my finger. Otherwise you would slip. Whereas if you're on the flat bit, there, you have a natural assistance from gravity, which is pushing you down directly into the perfect angle for the foothold. So if we look at a foothold like this, even though it's quite small, it still has a sweet spot. So we want to train ourselves to be able to identify that. So instead of thinking of our whole hand and when you stand, where you hold it, just think about one finger. And again, on smears, even though it's a negative slope, the theory is exactly the same. Yeah, that's it. So we know about the shoe, and we know about the foothold. So right part of the shoe meets the right part of the foothold, and then the last thing is the connection. In a nutshell, there needs to be weight from the foot to the foothold. And there are two things you can do to make sure there's weight on it. One is that when you first put your foot on a foothold, there'll be no weight on it, right? Because you just got there. So it always helps to press down a little bit on that point that is important. Just like if you had to put a piece of paper against a wall, just the amount of pressure to keep it on. And then the second part is the more complicated or interesting bit, which is that we need to consider where our center of gravity is in the rest of our body. So when we move on to the next foothold, we're essentially putting our center of gravity more and more over it, and that increases the weight on it. Okay, so now we're just going to see how that looks like in action. There you go, placing my foot on the pivot point, up to here, Right now I'm just going to put my foot here, but again I'm following the slope. It's more comfortable for this move. And then when I come over, you know, because your knee is pointing that way, there is a temptation sometimes to place your foot like this. But as you can see, there's no surface area contact. So you have to make an effort to turn the foot a little, but just at a 3/4 angle. And even then it's a bit awkward, so I'm going to just shift my weight a little bit more over, and immediately you can see there's much more surface area contact. Now the placement is good. I'm pushing it down just a little bit, and it's enough so that when I stand up onto it, it's ready to take my weight. Alright, so now we'll see do the purple, see what happens. So standing on the pivot point. Cool. Alright, so I'm really aiming on this one because it's small with my toe. Same with this, making sure to create enough of that horizontal platform. Now I've pushed down, got some weight on it, it's easier to shift the weight. And to bring the foot up, I would put the weight on, pivot a little. See, it's still on, which is what I wanted. And we just do the same. So this is the hardest one so far, so it should be fun. So on my pivot point, and that allows me to foot swap. Now when I place my foot here, my first instinct is to be like this. So we need to be more conscious to like dig it in. And that just gives you the extra support. And the same with this, and you can see, that gives me so much support. I can basically hold on with nothing. And that also allows me to pivot, which gives me the space to bring my foot up. And then we arrive at the tricky bit, so with the weight transfer. So these footholds are not very small, but because the handhold is so poor, we need to rely on them completely. So at this point, all the weight's on my right foot and very little on my left. So what I want to do is really identify the flattest bit of the foothold, so I'm confident, and press down on it. That's not quite enough, so now I start to shift my weight to the left. And I keep shifting my weight until the weight is completely on it, and I can stand up on it. Pivot and foot swap. Textbook.
So the focus of today's video has been how to improve your footwork with Xian, and something that we personally believe is an instant improvement on your footwork skills can be a good quality pair of high performance climbing shoes. This month Madrock launched their UK shop, so now if you're based in the UK, you can try out Madrocks for yourself. So maybe you've heard a lot about the drones too, or another model of Madrock shoes that you've wanted to try for a little while. Now you can. We're really excited to watch Madrock make a splash in the UK, and we have an offer with them that is free shipping if you're based in the UK. So if you have been wanting to try them for a while and you are based in the UK, you can get free shipping on your first order. Feel free to shoot any messages you have about sizing or fit to me. I definitely have a lot of recommendations. These drones are incredible. So when I first tried the drones, they were a lot stiffer than I was ordinarily used to in a climbing shoe, and I wasn't sure that I was going to get on with them. However, when I spent a bit of time with them and wore them in, these are absolutely amazing. I wear them predominantly inside, but we recently came back from a trip to Font, and this was the only shoe, bar these, for a session that I wore. These are still a bit newer. I have a bit of wearing in to do, which I might do today through our session with Xian. But these have just become my kind of like everyday, every session, every terrain shoe. Something that you hear a lot about with the drones specifically is the heel. And I can attest to the height of this heel. I'm not the strongest with heel hooks, and I feel like these give me an advantage that my hamstrings do not. I suspect, gazing into my crystal ball, that we'll be seeing a lot more of Madrock in the UK. So if you're based in the UK and you want to try them for yourself, then I highly recommend that you do. The code on screen here, HMBFREE, gets you free shipping on your first order of Madrocks if you're based in the UK. So stock up. And now into the tips with Xian.
So what we're now going to do, Hannah and I have got our shoes on. We're going to have a go at a couple of problems to try and apply some of the tips that Xian has just told us about. There's definitely a few things in there that maybe actually challenge a few of the ways or the habits that I've gotten into for using those 3 different types of foothold. So I've first of all picked out a problem with some very in-cut footholds on. So some of these holds here, they're very in-cut, so they're like a nice crimp kind of shape for handholds. And I think the way I normally tackle these would just be to think about stepping on as much surface area as possible and just pushing up to get to the next hold. Very much with my foot flat or even heel slightly down.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens when you change how he steps and how that, see if that changes anything.
Now I'm really going to focus on the tip that we got given, which was on these kind of in-cut holds. I saw the way that Xian really kind of was digging her toes into the in-cut part of the hold and really kind of applying the pressure with her foot, kind of digging in on it is the best way I think I can describe it, the way that I understood it. So instead, I'm really going to go for toe in behind the lip and pressing in. And again for these ones. So there's the comparison of the second way. Xian, you told me that you noticed a difference when I tried that blue climb a minute ago with those 2 different methods off the camera.
Yeah.
So I was quite aware of it then when I was climbing. Definitely when I pressed in on that big blue in-cut hold there, I can feel my hips, I think, being sucked into the wall a little bit. So I don't know if you'd mind demonstrating what you think the difference is between the way you suggested and the way that I have always been using these kind of footholds.
You were here and you placed it like this, so your weight is actually here rather than over the foothold. If in this situation you try to push from your leg, you would actually push yourself out of the wall. So your body instinctively, I think, realized that's not going to work, and how you actually went out was like this, in a less exaggerated way. So the second time, when we bring that toe in, now your weight is actually above the foothold. So if I straighten this leg now, it's actually going to send me in the correct direction. And that's what you did the last time.
So that was the first revelation that's come out of it for me. And now I think Hannah's going to hop on a problem with a lot of kind of smeary footholds and just see how it feels for us trying to apply all the tips that you've given us so far.
Yeah, so you've basically got Hannah to do the death smears.
Yes, exactly.
So I somehow got smears. So we're going to try this pink Smeary foothold climb here up this arete, which looks like it might be quite balance intensive, but also it might be quite important where I'm placing my feet to make sure that my centre of gravity is correct and not pulling me off the wall in a kind of barn door is how I'm reading it from the ground.
Okay, so just looking at your climbing, I feel like in terms of like your technique points, it was actually pretty good. Like you took your time to find the right bits, you got to the flattest bit of the footholds and you placed it first, and then you kind of gently put your weight on it, which is great. So you could actually feel it like biting. Could you feel it biting? Yeah. So that's really good. So that all looks solid. The only thing I noticed is that you seem quite tense, like in your face as you were climbing it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So that's something to note. So even though you're quite tense in your face, it wasn't too bad because you didn't tense up too much in your upper body, which is the sort of classic stress response. But that's just something to be really mindful of, because if you became really stressed and you started tensing in your upper body, it actually can take the weight off your foot. So I think a good practice would be to do it again. Now that you have the confidence that it works, you know what it is, try to be more relaxed.
I definitely had a little bit of, I don't know if you, well, I guess you would call it hesitancy around weighting this back. So I felt like it would probably do me well to try and find with my hand first the point of the hold that's the most flat, and then have that as kind of like a visual.
So what I would do is just touch the whole thing, because you can sort of feel it. You can always close your eyes and just go there all the way, because it gives you that sense. Yeah, they look casual, which is what we wanted to be.
Felt more relaxed. I think having tried it once, I was more familiar with it. It felt a little bit less intimidating. I felt more secure. I trusted my feet more.
Good, very good.
Okay, so one of Xian's next tips to do with standing on edges, or those kind of flat holds, that I think might be really relevant to a few problems that I've been having in my climbing, are to do with whether I'm using the pivot point on my shoe or if I'm using an inside or outside edge. So we've picked out a very, very crimpy purple that I'm going to have a go at. I've never tried it before. I can feel how I would normally want to do this, so I'm going to give it a go like that, and then we're going to see if there's any tweaks that we can make to the footwork side of things, see if they make a difference. So I would say that I have a really big preference for using inside edges and outside edges. And when I've just been talking it through, I think that's because I feel like inside edges and outside edges make it really easy for me to get my hips close to the wall. And then again here, turn that to an outside edge. It feels like a very stable position. But I think what's been pointed out to me is that although that position is stable, it might then be causing me problems when I'm moving or transitioning out of that position and getting further up the climb. Take the easy way out at the top. Very hard for me.
Okay, okay.
Or just uncomfortable.
Okay.
Awkward, not climbing that I like at all.
Yeah.
Feels a bit clumsy when I'm doing it.
Okay.
Probably looks a bit clumsy.
I think we should try one thing at a time.
Okay.
And you know, we don't know at this stage which is going to be better, your edges or your pivot point.
Yeah.
And this is actually, in a way, a good exploration to do anyway.
Okay.
So now you've tested it once on the edges, now you'll test it once on the pivot point.
Okay.
Whatever is the correct answer, you can now piece together for each move which is best.
Okay. So it might not be one size fits all. It might be that one move it helps me with, another one I do want to use the edge on. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Tip of the shoe on the hold. My heel is much more back from the wall. Oh, I don't want to do the top move again. I just chickened the top move because I didn't need to do it again.
Okay.
Cool, that's interesting.
What's interesting? Share, please.
The first bit definitely felt smoother. It just felt like I transferred the weight more smoothly from start position to onto this right foot. I think that's what it did actually. It made it easier to transfer the weight onto my right foot. And I'm not sure what happened up there, but it didn't feel like I wanted to put an outside edge on. I don't know if my hip positioning ended up a little bit different. I think I ended up putting a pivot point on, which made it feel like the natural move for me was then to flag underneath and reach up.
Yeah. Okay,
What
let
do you
me
think?
put my shoes on and explain.
Okay.
So when he was on his outside edge, you're naturally facing this way. Your hips will be your side onto the wall. This is natural, yeah? So then, when he got to here, his foot will still be on. His upper body wanted to be front on, like chest facing the wall, but his lower body was side onto the wall because of the outside edge. So your upper body and your lower body is fighting each other. So then when you try to go that way, it doesn't move, which makes it harder. When you have your pivot point on, and you reach this point, it allows you to turn that foot just a bit, hip. So now your upper body is front on and your lower body is front on, so they work together.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well explained. Makes sense what I felt when I see you do it there.
Yeah.
I think one thing you mentioned there, Xian, and it relates to Hannah and I, and probably to a lot of other people out there, is that people have very different shoe sizes and foot sizes. Do you think it's common that a bigger foot size would need more stability? Do you think maybe that's why I started off using those kind of big, like well-supported edges of the shoe more? Is that something that you think people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a factor, because if we take both our shoes now, on your shoe, we got to here. Let's make a mark of what's here. On this shoe, it comes up to here.
Yeah, so you're getting further into the ball of the foot almost.
Yeah.
You're closer down to the ball of the foot on the smaller shoe.
Yeah, the foothold's always the same size, but the ratio of what that gives me is completely different to what that gives you.
Yeah.
So of course you're going to have a greater need for stability for your bigger foot. So like an equivalent need for me would be more like there, right? For example.
Yeah.
But then usually the person with the smaller foot is usually also shorter, and the person with the bigger foot is taller. So the person with the smaller foot usually needs more movement because they need to get to their tiptoes more often.
Okay. I think with one shoe in our hands and one shoe on our foot, so it's a good point to wrap up the video as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's been an amazing tutorial. Can't thank you enough for joining us. Xian is a coach based out of the Reading and London areas mainly. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, I go between West London and Reading.
Yeah. So we'll put links to all of Xian's coaching pages, social links, etc. in the video description, so make sure to go and check her stuff out. Yeah, really highly recommend a session with Xian. It's been great today, and we will see you all in our next video, so thank you very much for joining us.